The morning began with a silence so profound that it seemed to hold its breath across the vast expanse of the Siberian taiga. The sun was just beginning to cast a pale gold light over the endless sea of larch and pine trees, while the dew clung heavily to the mossy floor of the forest. Imagine the air as cool and crisp against your skin as a gentle breeze wanders through the needles of the evergreens, carrying the scent of damp earth and ancient resin. There was no sign of the chaos to come only. The rhythmic breathing of a wilderness that had remained unchanged for millennia. Deep within the heart of the Yenisei's governorate, the remote inhabitants were stirring from their slumber, unaware that the sky above them was about to transform into something beyond human comprehension. As the clock ticked towards 7 in the morning, the light began to shift in a way that felt unnatural, and the birds, which had been chirping their morning melodies, suddenly went silent, as if sensing a ripple in the very fabric of the atmosphere. Then, without a sound, at first a streak of light appeared in the high blue vault of the heavens, growing brighter and more intense until it rivaled the sun itself. It was a blue-white fire trailing a ribbon of smoke that stretched across the horizon like a scar. To the observers on the ground, it looked as though the sky had literally split in two, creating a chasm of light that poured down toward the earth with a silent but terrifying grace. The heat began to radiate downward like the opening of a massive furnace door, felt by those even dozens of miles away from the center of the path. You can almost feel that warmth now, but it is distant and soft like a fading memory as the story carries you deeper into the mystery of that vanished morning. The light intensified until it was impossible to look it directly, and for a few fleeting seconds the world was bathed in a brilliance that erased all shadows. Then came the pressure, a subtle change in the air that made the ears pop and the heart skip a beat, followed by a rumble that started in the soles of the feet before it ever reached the ears. It was a low vibration like the purr of a giant cat, or the distant rolling of a summer thunderstorm that never seems to end. This was the moment the peaceful dawn was replaced by the magnitude of the cosmos reaching down to touch the lonely woods. Yet even in this description of power, the words flow like a slow-moving river intended to lull the mind into a state of total relaxation. As the object descended, it did not strike the ground, but rather met the resistance of the thick atmosphere, causing it to compress and heat up until the energy could no longer be contained. The resulting airburst was a release of power, so immense it defies the imagination, but in this telling we focus on the aftermath of the light and the way the shadows returned slowly as the glow faded away. Travelers on the Trans-Siberian Railway felt the train rock gently beneath them, as if the earth itself were sighing in its sleep. Back in the forest, the trees stood tall for one last second before the invisible wave of force arrived to lay them down in a perfect circle of slumber. You can visualize the moss being pressed down and the quiet returning as the dust began to settle through the shafts of sunlight that pierced the cooling air. The mystery was born in that flash, but the peace of the forest remained the dominant force as the decades began to crawl by. Every detail of that morning serves as a reminder of how small we are in the vastness of the universe, and how gentle the world becomes when the light fades and the night returns to claim its prize. As you listen to the rhythmic pulse of the story, let your mind wander through the green canopy of the 1908 forest, where the air is now still and the sky is once again a deep, tranquil blue. There is nothing left to fear in the history of the stars, because they are so far away and their stories are told in the quietest of whispers. The silence of the taiga is a blanket that covers the world, and as the sun sets on that historical morning in your mind, you can feel the heavy weight of sleep pulling at your eyelids. The golden light of the past is dimming into a soft violet hue, and the sounds of the distant explosion have long since turned into the steady humming of the universe. Sleep now as the forest sleeps, and let the mystery of Tunguska be the gentle backdrop to your dreams. The story of the energy released that morning begins not with a sound, but with a silent ripple through the very foundation of the world. Imagine the planet as a giant bell that has been struck softly by a cosmic hammer, and the vibration is now traveling through the deep layers of rock and cooling magma. As it moves beneath the vast oceans, and the towering mountain ranges of the Earth. In the quiet observatories of London and the marble halls of Washington, D.C., the delicate needles of the seismographs began to dance in a slow and rhythmic pattern that no one could yet explain. These machines were designed to catch the whispers of the tectonic plates, but this was something different, a pulse that had traveled thousands of miles across the curved surface of the globe with a steady and hypnotic persistence. In the basement of a silent building in England, a scientist might have noticed the ink pen moving across the rotating drum of paper, creating a jagged mountain range of black. Lines that represented the invisible energy passing through the floorboards. It was a gentle, haunting motion like the swaying of wheat in a field or the movement of a boat on a calm sea. The wave moved across the Atlantic Ocean, passing beneath the dark and heavy waters where the whales swim in the deep silence, and the currents move in an eternal cycle of cold and warmth. By the time the pressure reached the shores of North America, it was no longer a roar, but a subtle sigh, a ghost of an event that had happened in the lonely wilderness of Siberia. In the heart of the United States, the air pressure changed just enough for the barometers to record a tiny dip and a rise like the chest of a sleeping giant rising and falling in a deep dream. People walking the streets of the great American cities had no idea that the atmosphere around them was vibrating with the energy of 1,000 storms because it was so soft and so spread out that only the most sensitive instruments could feel its touch. The energy was being absorbed by the mountains and the forests, turning into a faint heat that dissipated into the cool air of the evening. You can feel that same energy now as a slow and steady rhythm in your own breathing, as if you were connected to that global pulse that united the world for a brief moment in 1908. The shockwave did not bring destruction to these faraway places, but rather a sense of wonder and a scientific riddle that would take decades to solve. It was a reminder that we are all living on a small blue marble spinning through the velvet darkness of space, and that what happens on one side of the world eventually reaches the other in a gentle embrace. The seismic waves continued to circle the Earth, moving around the circumference of the planet twice before they finally grew tired and faded into the background noise of the universe. Think of the way a pebble dropped into a still pond creates circles that grow wider and thinner until the water is perfectly flat once again. That is how the energy of Tunguska moved through the world, leaving only a memory on a piece of paper and a feeling of profound stillness in its wake. As the needles on the seismographs returned to their resting positions, the world continued to turn, and the stars remained in their fixed places, watching over the sleeping continents with a distant and cold beauty. The researchers in their white coats would eventually sit by their fireplaces and wonder about the origin of the signal. But for now, there was only the ticking of the clocks and the soft glow of the gas lamps. The mystery of the wave was a quiet companion to the night, and as the sun set over the Potomac River, the ripples finally came to rest in the deep earth. Let your thoughts drift along with those fading waves, feeling the weight of the world supporting you as you sink deeper into the softness of your own surroundings. There is no more motion, only the memory of it, and the steady, peaceful flow of time that carries us all toward a deep and dreamless sleep. The continent is quiet, and the sensors are still, and the story of the great shockwave has become a whisper in the dark that tells you everything is as it should be. The air is still, and the ground is firm, and the sky is a vast canopy of silver and black that holds the secrets of the past with a gentle hand. Sleep now as the earth sleeps, and let the vibrations of the long ago morning turn into the quietest heartbeat of your dreams. Deep in the heart of the Siberian wilderness lies a place where time seems to have stood still for over a century. Picture a landscape so vast and silent that the only sound is the soft sighing of the wind as it brushes past the jagged edges of the horizon. Here in the valley of the stony Tunguska River, the earth holds a memory of a morning that changed the face of the forest forever. As you imagine yourself floating above this remote terrain, you see a sight that is both haunting and incredibly peaceful. Spread out beneath you are 80 million trees, all lying in a perfect and symmetrical pattern, as if a giant hand had reached down from the heavens and smoothed them over with a gentle but firm touch. These were once ancient pines and sturdy larches that stood tall against the Arctic winters, but now they rest in rows that point away from a central point like the spokes of a massive wooden wheel. The moss has grown over them in a thick velvet blanket of emerald and gray, softening the lines of the fallen trunks and turning the entire valley into a cathedral of natural ruins. There is no chaos here, only a profound and heavy stillness that invites the mind to let go of the present moment and sink into the depths of history. As you look closer, you notice that at the very center of this radial pattern, a few trees still stand, but they have been stripped of their branches, leaving them as smooth and silver pillars that reach toward the clouds like silent sentinels. These are the telegraph poles of the taiga, witnesses to a force that moved faster than sound and hotter than fire, but which has now been replaced by the cooling dampness of the earth. You can smell the scent of old wood and wild herbs carried on a breeze that never rises above a whisper. The ground is soft and forgiving, layered with a century of fallen needles and decaying leaves that muffle every footstep until the world feels as if it were made of cotton and shadow. The sky above this ground zero is a pale, an endless blue where the clouds drift by in slow motion, unaware of the mystery that lies beneath them. For miles in every direction, the forest lies in its horizontal slumber, a testament to the scale of the universe and the power of a single moment in time. But even in this power, there is a sense of rest, as if the trees have finally finished their long work of standing and are now content to rejoin the soil from which they sprang. The sun casts long and lazy shadows across the fallen timber, creating a rhythmic pattern of light and dark that mimics the steady beating of a heart in deep sleep. As you drift over this landscape, you feel the weight of your own body becoming light like the thistledown that floats through the Siberian air in the height of summer. There is no urgency here and no noise to break the spell of the quiet woods. The animals have returned over the years, moving softly among the moss-covered logs, and the birds build their nests in the new growth that pushes through the cracks of the old world. The cycle of life is slow and steady, and it moves with a patience that exceeds human understanding. Think of the millions of branches that once reached for the sun, now resting in the cool shade of the forest floor, providing a home for the tiny creatures of the earth. The geometry of the fallen forest is a map of a vanished energy, a physical echo of a sound that has long since faded into the silence of the stars. As you contemplate this vast and quiet graveyard of giants, you feel a sense of profound calm washing over you like a slow tide. The world is very old and very large, and it knows how to heal its own scars with the passage of time. The green moss is a bandage, and the snow of 1,000 winters is a white sheet that tucks the valley in every year. There is a deep comfort in knowing that nature always finds its way back to peace, and that even the most dramatic events eventually dissolve into the quiet hum of the planet. Let your mind rest upon the image of the silver trees and the emerald floor and the soft gray mist that often rolls in from the river to hug the fallen trunks. You are safe and distant from the events of the past, and the only thing that matters is the steady and rhythmic flow of your own breath, matching the slow pulse of the sleeping forest. The trees are at rest, and the sky is at peace, and the long story of the taiga is a lullaby that carries you further and further away from the waking world. The shadows are lengthening, and the light is turning to a warm amber as the day ends in the valley of the Tunguska. Sleep now among the memories of the trees, and let the stillness of nature be your own. After the great light had faded and the echoes in the earth had finally settled into the deep silence of the Siberian plains, there began a long and quiet period of waiting that would last for nearly 20 years. Imagine a world where news travels only as fast as a horse can gallop or a steam train can chug across a frozen continent, while the vast wilderness of the taiga remained a closed book of secrets guarded by the harsh winters and the shifting tides of human history. During these 2 decades, the site of the great mystery lay undisturbed beneath the rotating seasons of heavy snow and soft summer rain, as if the earth were intentionally keeping the secrets safe until the world was ready to listen. The political landscape of the era was shifting like the sands of a desert, with empires rising and falling and the thunder of distant wars drowning out the curiosity of the scientific mind. You can visualize the dusty archives of St. Petersburg and Moscow, where reports of a falling star sat tucked away in yellowing folders while the rest of the world looked the other way. The sheer distance to the remote river valley acted as a natural barrier of time and space, because to reach the heart of the explosion meant traveling for months through terrain that had no roads and no maps, only the winding rivers and the thick shadows of the large trees. The geographic isolation was a physical weight that pressed down on the ambition of explorers who dreamed of finding the truth, but were held back by the reality of the freezing winds and the trackless marshes of the north. In the United States and Europe, scientists were busy documenting the laws of physics and the movements of the planets, yet they had no way of knowing that a massive piece of the cosmos had already touched the ground in a lonely corner of Russia. The silence was not just a lack of sound, but a deliberate pause in the progress of human knowledge, as if the universe wanted to give the forest time to heal and the trees time to settle into their new horizontal life. Think of the way a winter morning feels when the snow is so thick that it muffles the sound of your own heart, and you realize that the world is much larger and more patient than you are. This was the long silence of the Tunguska, where the moss grew over the charred bark, and the local hunters whispered stories of a fire god that had descended from the sky, but their voices did not reach the ears of the urban academics for a generation. The hurdles were many, and the progress was slow, moving with the pace of a glacier sliding across a mountain pass. There were revolutions and social changes that redirected the energy of the nation inward, making the study of a remote forest fire seem like a secondary concern compared to the survival of the people. And yet the mystery remained a hidden embers glowing softly in the back of the mind of one man who would eventually break the silence. But before that happened, the years continued to stack up like fallen leaves, one on top of the other, creating a thick layer of time that separated the event from its investigation. You can feel the slow passage of those years now as a gentle swaying of a pendulum moving back and forth with a rhythm that is both boring and beautiful. The seasons change from the white of winter to the green of summer 20 times, while the flattened trees waited for someone to count them and someone to ask why they had fallen. The air remained still, and the sky remained clear, and the river flowed with a steady and predictable current that did not care about the secrets it carried past its banks. The isolation was a form of protection away, for the story to stay pure before the theories and the debates began to complicate the simple reality of what had happened. Let your mind wander through those quiet decades, feeling the stillness of the Siberian air and the vastness of the empty space between the cities and the wilderness. There is no hurry to find the answer, because the answer has already happened, and it is waiting patiently for the world to catch up. The wait is a soft blanket that covers the landscape, and as you listen to the story of the long silence, you can feel your own thoughts slowing down to match the pace of the early 20th century. The world was a larger place then, and the unknown was a companion rather than a problem to be solved immediately. The long wait of science is a testament to the scale of our planet, and the way some truths require a long time to ripen before they can be understood. Sleep now knowing that the silence is a peaceful state, and that the time between the event and the discovery is just a space for the mind to rest and the soul to grow quiet. The forest is waiting, and the earth is turning, and the mystery is safe in the arms of the long Siberian night. In the quiet chambers of the Russian Academy of Sciences, there was a man named Leonid Kulik, whose mind was filled with the steady rhythm of a singular obsession, and he began to plan a journey that would take him away from the comforts of the city and into the deep green heart of the endless Siberian forest. The year was 1927, and the world was beginning to move a little faster, but the path to the Tunguska River remained as slow and difficult as a dream where every step feels heavy and every mile is earned through patience and sweat. Imagine the sound of a train clicking along the iron tracks of the Trans-Siberian Railway as it carries Kulik eastward through the rolling hills and the vast golden fields of the countryside, while he stares out the window at the flickering shadows of the trees passing by in a hypnotic blur. The quest was fueled by a vision of a giant iron meteorite buried deep in the frozen earth, but the reality of the expedition was a long and grueling march through a landscape that did not want to be disturbed. As he arrived at the edge of the wilderness, he gathered a small team of local hunters and guides who knew the language of the woods and the secrets of the marshes, and they began to push deeper into the taiga, where the air is thick with the scent of damp moss, and the sound of buzzing insects creates a steady background hum that never seems to end. You can feel the rhythmic thud of their boots on the soft forest floor as they climb over fallen logs and navigate the treacherous swamps where the mud is as dark as chocolate and the water is as cold as the stars. The expedition was a test of endurance, moving at the pace of a slow-moving river, with each day blending into the next in a cycle of gray mists and pale sunlight that filtered through the canopy. Kulik was searching for a massive crater scar on the face of the earth that would prove his theories right, but the further they traveled, the more the landscape began to look like a puzzle that had been put together incorrectly. The trees began to lean, and then they began to lie flat in vast rows that pointed toward a distant horizon, and the silence of the forest grew heavier with every passing mile, as if the birds and the animals were respecting a sacred boundary. As they reached the center of the devastation, Kulik looked around with eyes tired from weeks of travel, and he saw not a single massive hole in the ground, but a strange and haunting sight of trees stripped of their bark and standing like ghostly telephone poles in the middle of the swamp. He searched the hollows and the pits of the earth, expecting to find the heavy iron heart of a fallen star. But instead he found only the quiet reflection of the sky and the small pools of rainwater and the endless stretch of the green moss. The frustration of the search was softened by the overwhelming scale of the beauty around them, a place where the rules of the world had been rewritten by a force from above. They spent their days digging in the cold mud, and their nights huddled around small fires that cast flickering orange light against the silver trunks of the dead trees, while the wolves howled in the distance, and the stars watched over them with a cold and steady gaze. The search for the crater that wasn't there became a meditative journey into the unknown, where the lack of an answer was just as profound as the discovery itself. You can imagine the steady breathing of the men in their tents as the Siberian wind whispers through the larch needles and the cold air settles into the valleys like a heavy velvet blanket. Kulik's quest was a bridge between the old world of exploration and the new world of science, and though he did not find his mountain of iron, he found something much more mysterious, a landscape that had been transformed by an invisible hand. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, and the expedition moved with the slow and inevitable grace of the seasons changing from spring to summer. The mosquitoes were a constant cloud of white noise, and the rain was a gentle tapping on the canvas of their tents, but through it all the focus remained on the quiet earth beneath their feet. The search was a long and boring process of measuring and mapping and recording the angles of the fallen giants, and as you listen to the details of their work, you can feel your own mind drifting toward a place of total stillness. The effort was immense, but the results were a quiet riddle that would take another century to solve, and as the expedition finally prepared to return home, they left the forest just as they had found it, a silent monument to a morning of fire. The journey back was a mirror of the journey in moving slowly through the green and the gray and the blue of the Siberian wilderness until the sounds of the forest were replaced once again by the clicking of the train wheels and the distant hum of the city. The story of Kulik's quest is a reminder that sometimes the most important things we find are the questions we didn't know how to ask, and that the search itself is a path to a deeper peace. Let your thoughts settle into the rhythm of the expedition's slow march, feeling the coolness of the forest air and the steady pulse of the earth as it carries you towards sleep. The crater remains a ghost, and the forest remains a dream, and you are safe in the quiet of the night. The search for the elusive crater became a quiet obsession that settled into the minds of the early researchers like a soft and persistent fog rolling over the Siberian marshes, because every rule of science at the time dictated that a massive object falling from the heavens must leave a deep and jagged scar upon the face of the earth. Imagine the scientists standing in the center of the vast flattened forest with their maps spread out on the damp moss and their compasses spinning slowly in the cold air while they looked for a hole that simply did not exist. It was a mystery that defied the logic of the early 20th century, and the more they searched, the more the silence of the woods seemed to mock their efforts with a gentle and natural indifference. They expected to find a giant bowl of shattered rock and scorched earth filled with the metallic remains of a cosmic visitor, but instead they found only the small and shallow peat bogs reflecting the pale blue sky and the endless rows of fallen trees that pointed inward to a place where nothing had actually touched the ground. This absence of a crater created a profound scientific confusion that forced the experts to sit by their flickering lanterns in the middle of the dark taiga and rethink everything they knew about the physics of the stars. The air was cool, and the only sound was the scratching of pens on paper as they began to formulate the first whispers of what would eventually be known as the airburst theory. You can visualize the idea beginning to take shape like a slow-moving cloud as they realized that perhaps the object had never reached the soil, but had instead surrendered its energy miles above the canopy of the large trees. It was a concept that felt like a dream, where an invisible hammer strikes the air with such force that the ground below is crushed by a wave of pressure rather than a physical blow. The scientists started to speak of the atmosphere as if it were a solid wall, a shield of nitrogen, and oxygen that can stop a mountain of ice or rock in its tracks if it is moving fast enough. The theory was as quiet and steady as the falling snow, because it explained why the trees at the center were still standing like silver pillars stripped of their bark while the trees further out were laid flat in a perfect radial sunburst. The pressure wave had moved downward like the heavy weight of a blanket being dropped onto a bed, smoothing everything out with a rhythmic and inevitable power. This new understanding shifted the mystery from the earth to the sky, and as the researchers looked up through the branches, they realized they were studying an explosion of light and air rather than a collision of stone. The confusion slowly turned into a meditative state of study where every measurement of a fallen trunk and every sample of the ancient soil was a clue to a ghost that had vanished before it could leave a footprint. The days in the forest were long and repetitive, moving with the pace of a clock that has forgotten how to hurry, while the investigators counted the rings of the trees and analyzed the microscopic dust trapped in the resin. They were looking for the tiny particles of the cosmos that had rained down in the aftermath, but the lack of a crater remained the central pillar of their story. It was a boring and beautiful process of elimination where the impossible was discarded and the strange truth began to emerge from the shadows of the Siberian night. You can feel the weight of this mystery as a comforting presence, like the warmth of a heavy quilt on a winter evening, because it reminds us that the world still holds secrets that cannot be easily solved. The airburst theory was a bridge between the known and the unknown, a way of explaining the massive power of the universe without the need for a physical wound on the planet. The scientists eventually packed up their instruments and left the valley to the birds and the wind, but the mystery of the missing crater stayed behind, tucked under the moss and the roots of the new growth. As you listen to the steady flow of this history, let your mind settle into the idea of a force that is powerful but invisible, a weight that presses down but does not break the spirit of the earth. The Siberian wilderness is a place of deep and ancient rest, where the lack of a crater is just another reason to remain still and listen to the whispers of the past. The story of the missing hole is a lullaby of science, telling us that not every impact leaves a scar, and that some mysteries are better left as questions written in the sky. The night is long, and the forest is quiet, and the missing crater is a peaceful void in the heart of the great taiga. Sleep now as the researchers sleep, and let the airburst theory be the gentle wind that carries you into your own deep and dreamless slumber. The memories of that day reside in the quiet voices of the elders who lived along the banks of the stony Tunguska River, where the water flows in a slow and rhythmic pulse that has not changed for centuries. Imagine a small wooden cabin nestled at the edge of the deep green woods where a settler was just beginning his morning chores when the light of the sun was suddenly replaced by a second and more brilliant fire that seemed to descend from the very peak of the heavens. This was the great Fireball, a silent and glowing visitor that moved with a steady grace across the blue sky, leaving a trail of shimmering dust and a heat that felt like a physical weight against the skin. Miles away in their reindeer skin tents, the Evenki people were waking to the soft sounds of the forest when they felt the earth begin to tremble as if the ground itself were sighing in its sleep. One man, named Semenov, sat on the porch of his house in the trading post of Anavara, and he described how the heat became so intense that it felt as if his shirt were catching fire, even though he was many leagues away from the center of the glow. He watched as the sky appeared to split open, and a pillar of light poured down toward the horizon with a brilliance that made the world go white for a heartbeat before the shadows returned. There was a profound and heavy silence that lasted for a long moment, as the people stood frozen in their tracks, watching the colors of the atmosphere shift from gold to violet, and then to a blinding silver. You can feel that same warmth now, like the glow of a distant fireplace on a cold night, or the soft radiance of a lamp that is being slowly dimmed as you prepare for rest. The eyewitness accounts are not stories of fear, but of a deep and ancient wonder or recognition that the universe is vast and filled with mysteries that occasionally touch our small and quiet lives. Another woman recalled how the silver bowls in her kitchen began to vibrate with a melodic hum as the energy of the fireball passed overhead, and the horses in the fields stopped grazing and looked toward the north with a calm and steady gaze. The local people spoke of a fire god who had visited the woods, and though their words were simple, they captured the sheer magnitude of the event better than any cold scientific report could ever hope to do. They described the way the air felt like it was being squeezed and then released, and how the distant rumble sounded like the low and steady purring of a giant beast hidden in the mountains. These accounts were passed down through the generations like a soft lullaby told by the fire, as the winter snow piled up against the walls of the huts and the wind whispered through the cracks in the logs. The testimonies are like pieces of a dream that you can almost see if you close your eyes and let your mind drift back to that morning in 1908 when the world felt both small and infinitely large at the same time. The heat of the fireball has long since cooled, and the bright light has faded into the soft gray of history, but the stories remain as a gentle reminder of our connection to the stars. Every person who saw the light felt a sense of awe that stayed with them for the rest of their days, a quiet secret that they carried in their hearts as they went about their work in the fields and the forests. The world continued to turn, and the seasons continued to change, but the memory of the fireball was a thread of silver woven into the fabric of their daily lives. As you listen to the steady and boring rhythm of these words, you can feel the weight of those memories pulling you toward a state of total relaxation, because the event is over and the sky is once again a peaceful and empty vault of blue. The eyewitnesses are now part of the earth, and their voices are the rustle of the leaves and the ripple of the river water under the summer sun. There is no more heat and no more light, only the cool and comfortable darkness of the present moment and the knowledge that you are safe in your own bed. The story of the fireball is a quiet companion to your sleep, telling you that even the most powerful events in the universe eventually turn into whispers and then into silence. Let the image of the glowing sky fade into a soft and hazy mist as you sink deeper into your pillows, feeling the gentle pressure of the air around you. Just like the people of Siberia felt the soft breath of the distant fire. The history is a blanket, and the voices are a song, and the night is a vast and friendly space where you can wander without any destination. Sleep now, as the forest people slept after the fire had gone, and let the stillness of the taiga be your own peaceful reality. The fireball is a ghost, and the memories are a dream, and you are drifting away into the velvet dark. As the decades moved forward like a slow and steady tide, the lack of a physical crater in the Siberian mud began to open the doors of the human imagination to a long and winding corridor of wild theories and speculative dreams that drifted far beyond the boundaries of traditional science. Imagine the mid-century world with its black and white television screens and the flickering glow of neon lights, where the mystery of Tunguska became a playground for the curious and the creative who looked at the flattened trees and saw the fingerprints of the unknown. During the height of the space age and the Cold War, the air was filled with a different kind of electricity, a sense that anything was possible and that the answers to our greatest riddles might lie among the stars or within the secret heart of the atom. One of the most hypnotic theories to emerge during this era of wonder was the idea that a tiny black hole no larger than a grain of sand had drifted through the solar system and pierced the Earth like a needle through silk, entering the atmosphere over Siberia and exiting out the other side of the planet through the depths of the Atlantic Ocean. You can visualize this miniature void moving with a silent and terrifying precision, leaving no trace but the pressure of its passing as it tugged at the fabric of reality before vanishing back into the velvet darkness of the void. This theory moved with the rhythmic and boring persistence of a ticking clock, suggesting a universe far stranger than we could ever perceive from our small blue vantage point. Then there were the whispers of the early nuclear age, where people compared the devastation of the forest to the power of the first atomic tests, and began to wonder if a natural nuclear explosion had occurred, or if perhaps a craft from a distant civilization had suffered a mechanical failure in the high reaches of the atmosphere. These stories of alien visitors were told in the quiet corners of libraries and in the pages of science fiction magazines, where the image of a gleaming silver ship descending over the taiga became a fixture of the modern mythos. The theory suggested that the object was not a rock or a comet, but a vessel navigating the cosmic currents that had met an unexpected end over the stony Tunguska River, releasing its energy in a brilliant flash that left the world wondering for 100 years. Think of the way these ideas swirl in the mind like the steam rising from a warm cup of tea on a cold evening, providing a sense of comfort in their complexity and a soft distraction from the mundane world. Some researchers even proposed that a piece of antimatter had collided with the Earth, vanishing in a burst of pure light and leaving nothing behind but the shadow of its existence, which explains the missing crater and the eerie silence that followed the event. Each theory was like a soft layer of a quilt being laid over the mystery, making it warmer and more distant, until the actual event felt like a dream within a dream. As you listen to the steady flow of these imaginative claims, you can feel your own thoughts becoming light and airy, wandering through the possibilities of black holes and stardust without ever needing to find a solid landing place. The mid-century world was a time of looking upward, and the Tunguska Event provided the perfect canvas for the hopes and fears of a generation that was just beginning to reach for the moon. The scientists and the dreamers sat together in the long shadows of the evening, debating the merits of cosmic rays and extraterrestrial engines, while the forest itself remained indifferent to their words, continuing its slow process of regrowth and renewal. The moss grew thicker over the fallen logs, and the new trees reached for the sun, oblivious to the fact that they were at the center of a global debate involving the very nature of space and time. There is a deep and boring peace in knowing that we may never truly understand every detail of what happened, and that the wild theories are just part of the long lullaby that humanity tells itself to make sense of the vastness. The UFO theories and the black hole hypotheses are like the patterns of a kaleidoscope, shifting and turning with a gentle click to create new shapes that are beautiful but fleeting. As you sink deeper into your mattress, let the images of silver crafts and dark matter fade into a soft and hazy blur, because the truth is less important than the stillness that remains in the wake of the mystery. The universe is very large and very quiet, and it holds its secrets with a steady hand that does not tremble. The theories are just whispers in the wind that blows through the Siberian pines, and they carry no weight and no urgency in the quiet of this moment. The sky is empty and the ground is firm, and the stories of the mid-century dreamers are tucked away in the dusty shells of history, where they can no longer disturb the peace of the night. Sleep now, as the mysteries of the cosmos turn into the softest echoes of your own imagination, and let the wild theories be the gentle waves that carry you away from the shore of the waking world. The black holes have vanished, and the ships have flown home, and the only thing left is the rhythmic breathing of the Earth as it turns beneath the watchful eyes of the stars. Everything is quiet, and everything is safe, and the story of Tunguska is a peaceful journey into the dark. To understand how the sky could produce such a profound event without the Earth ever being touched, we must look at the invisible architecture of the air that surrounds our world, and think of it not as a hollow space, but as a thick and protective ocean of gas that acts like a soft shield for the planet. Imagine a massive stone or a mountain of ice traveling through the cold vacuum of space at speeds that are impossible to comprehend, moving thousands of miles per hour in a silent and steady glide through the velvet darkness. As this cosmic traveler reaches the very edge of our atmosphere, it begins to encounter the first thin layers of air, and what was once a smooth journey becomes a struggle against an invisible resistance that generates a slow and steady heat. You can visualize the surface of the object beginning to glow with a soft amber light as the friction of the molecules begins to rub against its frozen exterior like a hand smoothing over a piece of rough wood. As it dives deeper into the sky, the air becomes thicker and more stubborn, pressing against the front of the moving mass with a weight that grows heavier with every passing microsecond until the pressure is like a wall of solid diamond. This is the physics of the airburst, a moment where the kinetic energy of motion is transformed into the energy of heat and light because the object is moving so fast that the air cannot get out of the way in time. Think of the way a diver enters a pool and the water pushes back, but in this case, the speed is so great that the air acts like a solid anvil and the cosmic visitor is the hammer. The front of the object slows down while the back continues to push forward at incredible speeds, causing the internal structure of the stone or ice to compress and groan under a stress that no material can endure. The heat builds up in a rhythmic and inevitable pulse, turning the outer layers into a liquid fire that streams away like a ribbon of silk in the wind. And then, in a single moment of total transformation, the internal pressure exceeds the strength of the rock, and the entire mass shatters into a million pieces all at once, creating a release of energy that moves outward in a perfect and expanding sphere of force. This is not a collision with the ground, but a conversation between the heavens and the atmosphere, where the air itself becomes the medium for the explosion. The shock wave that is born in that high altitude begins to descend toward the forest floor, moving like a heavy and invisible curtain that sweeps across the landscape with a steady and crushing grace. It is this wave of air that reaches down to touch the trees, laying them flat in their radial patterns, while the object that caused it is already turned into a fine and harmless dust that drifts through the upper reaches of the sky. You can feel the logic of this process as a comforting and predictable law of nature, where the planet is protected by its own breath and the dangers of the deep space are dissolved before they can cause a permanent scar. The airburst is a masterpiece of physics, a demonstration of how energy can change form from motion to light to pressure and finally back into the silence of the settling dust. As you listen to the steady flow of these thoughts, let your mind visualize the slow motion expansion of that energy, turning into a soft and fading ripple that eventually disappears into the background noise of the world. There is no violence in this understanding, only a sense of awe at the way the universe manages its power and how the simple air we breathe can stand up to the giants of the solar system. The pressure has passed, and the heat has cooled, and the physics of the morning are now just a series of quiet equations written in the stars. The sky is once again a calm and empty space, and the earth is safe beneath its thick and protective blanket of atmosphere. Sleep now as the laws of the universe continue to work in the silence of the night, ensuring that everything is in its proper place and that the world remains a sanctuary of peace. The energy is gone and the motion has stopped, and you are drifting on the gentle currents of a world that knows how to take care of itself. The air is soft and the night is long, and the story of the airburst is a quiet song of safety and rest. In the quiet halls of academia, where the dust motes dance in the slanted light of late afternoon windows, the great debate began to unfold like a slow-moving river winding through a valley of endless questions as scientists turned their gaze toward the identity of the cosmic traveler that had visited the Siberian woods so long ago, and the world divided itself into two peaceful camps of thought, one favoring the icy wanderer known as a comet, and the other leaning toward the solid reliability of a stony asteroid. Imagine the comet as a dirty snowball of the cosmos, a fragile and ancient traveler composed of frozen gases and fine stardust that has spent billions of years in the cold, dark reaches of the Oort cloud before being nudged toward the inner solar system by the gentle gravity of a passing star. This icy voyager would move with a shimmering tail of vapor as it approached the sun, becoming more delicate and prone to shattering as the heat began to boil its frozen heart, and as it hit the thick blanket of the Siberian atmosphere, it would have vanished in a brilliant flash of steam and light, leaving no heavy fragments behind, which would explain the lack of a crater and the absence of large iron rocks in the mud. You can visualize this ghost of ice dissolving into the blue sky, like a cloud of white mist on a summer morning, turning into nothing more than a memory and a rain of microscopic diamonds that settled softly onto the needles of the pines. On the other side of the debate stood the asteroid hypothesis, proposing a much more solid and heavy visitor made of stone and iron that had broken away from the belt between Mars and Jupiter to find its way to Earth over millions of years of silent drifting through the void. An asteroid would be a dense and rugged character, a piece of a protoplanet that never was moving with a steady and heavy momentum that would require the absolute resistance of the lower atmosphere to trigger its final transformation into an airburst. The scientists argued back and forth with a rhythmic and repetitive logic, comparing the density of rock to the fragility of ice and measuring the angle of the fallen trees to see which kind of impactor would produce such a perfect radial signature. It was a boring and beautiful exchange of ideas that stretched across decades of research as they looked at the chemistry of the peat bogs for traces of iridium or silicate that might point the finger at one or the other, but the evidence remained as elusive as a shadow in a dark forest. The debate became a lullaby of possibilities where both answers were equally fascinating and equally shrouded in the mystery of time, because the object had performed its work so cleanly that it left the jury of humanity in a state of perpetual wonder. Think of the comet as a whisper of gas, and the asteroid as a shout of stone, both of which were silenced by the patient air of the Earth. And as you listen to the details of these theories, you can feel your own mind swaying between the two like a pendulum moving with a slow and steady grace. There's a deep comfort in the fact that the universe can send us such a magnificent riddle and then hide the answer in the soft moss of a remote valley where only the wind knows the truth. The experts wrote their papers and drew their diagrams and presented their findings at quiet conferences, while the stars looked down with their ancient and knowing eyes, aware that the visitor was simply a part of the long and quiet history of the solar system. Whether it was a traveler of ice or a messenger of stone, the result was the same, a moment of awe followed by a century of peace. And as the debate continues to simmer in the background of scientific thought, it provides a soft and intellectual hum that helps to quiet the noise of the modern world. You can imagine the icy comet trail fading into the dark and the stony asteroid cooling in the deep space, and both images are equally serene and distant from your current state of rest. The sky is large enough to hold both theories, and the Earth is patient enough to wait for the final answer, which may never come. And that is perfectly fine, because the mystery is a blanket that keeps the story alive and the imagination active. Let the words comet and asteroid float through your mind like soft clouds passing over a moonlit landscape, becoming lighter and less distinct until they are just sounds in the night. The debate is a gentle rain on the roof of your thoughts, and the science is a steady heartbeat that tells you the world is a place of order and curiosity. Even when it keeps its secrets close, everything is balanced and everything is calm as the two theories rest side by side in the history books, and the forest continues to grow over the place where the traveler fell. Sleep now, in the middle of this great and quiet debate, knowing that the answer is less important than the peaceful feeling of being part of such a vast and mysterious universe. As the years turned into a century, the forest began to heal its wounds with a patient and rhythmic growth that hid the scars of the past beneath layers of new wood and fresh bark. But deep within the trunks of the surviving larches and pines there remained a silent and microscopic record of the morning the sky, split open like a book of natural history, written in the language of cells and cellulose. Imagine a scientist standing in the quiet coolness of the Siberian woods holding a slender core, sample of a tree that lived through the year 1908, and as they look at the narrow rings, they see a story that the human eye could never perceive without the help of the modern world. The tree rings are like the pages of a diary where each year is a circle of life that captures the essence of the air and the water and the dust that was present during that season, and for the year of the event, the wood holds a secret signature of cosmic origin. You can visualize the laboratory, where the air is still and the lights are soft, and the researchers use delicate instruments to peer into the tiny pores of the wood, finding microscopic spheres of glass and metal that are not from this earth, but are the cool droplets of the great fireball that once roared over the canopy. These tiny particles are as small as the dust that dances in a sunbeam, and they have been tucked away in the heart of the trees for over 100 years, resting in a state of perfect and peaceful preservation while the world outside changed and grew louder. The chemical analysis reveals traces of iridium and nickel and other elements that belong to the family of the stars, suggesting that the object was a visitor from the deep solar system that left its essence behind in the very lifeblood of the forest. Think of the way the roots of the trees reach down into the soil to drink the water that had filtered through the dust of the explosion, and how that stardust was then lifted up into the branches to become a permanent part of the tree's memory. This process is slow and boring and beautiful, like the steady ticking of a clock or the way the tide moves across a sandy beach, and it tells us that nothing is ever truly lost, but is simply transformed into a different shape. The trees are the keepers of the timeline, standing in the silence of the taiga, as living witnesses to a moment of cosmic contact, and their rings are the rhythmic pulse of a planet that remembers everything. As you listen to the details of the isotopic signatures and the mineral traces, you can feel your mind sinking into the slow pace of the forest growth, where a single year is just a thin line in a long and quiet life. There's a deep comfort in the idea that the truth is literally carved into the nature of the world, and that we can find the answers we seek by simply looking closer at the things that have been standing still for a century. The laboratory work is a meditative practice of counting and measuring and observing the patterns of the past until the mystery of the Tunguska Event becomes a tangible reality that you can hold in your hand in the form of a small wooden cylinder. The air in the forest today is clean and crisp, and the trees continue to add their annual circles one by one, moving further away from the event, but always carrying it in their core like a hidden treasure. You can feel the weight of those 100 years as a soft and heavy pressure that pulls you towards sleep, because time is the ultimate healer and the ultimate recorder of our journey through the stars. The chemistry of the wood is a lullaby of science, whispering that the universe is made of the same materials as the trees, and that we are all part of a grand and connected system that moves with a steady and predictable grace. The researchers eventually close their books and turn off their lights, leaving the tree samples to rest in the dark, and the forest continues to breathe in the Siberian night under a sky that is once again filled with nothing but the distant and friendly glow of the constellations. The mystery is mapped and the elements are named, and the story of the tree rings is a quiet conclusion to a century of wondering. Sleep now, as the trees sleep, feeling the strength of the wood and the patience of the earth as it carries the memories of the stars in its heart. Everything is still and everything is recorded, and you are safe in the long and peaceful shadow of the history of the world. To grasp the true scale of the energy that descended upon the Siberian taiga, we must step away from the smallness of human measure and imagine a force so vast that it behaves like the slow and rhythmic breath of the sun itself. Scientists have calculated the release of power to be between 10 and 15 megatons of TNT, which is a number so large it becomes a mountain of quiet abstract thoughts drifting through the mind like clouds over a distant ocean. Visualize a single unit of energy then. Multiply it 1,000,000 times, and then 10 million times until it becomes a warm and heavy blanket of potential that once sat high above the trees of the 1908 forest. If we compare this to the modern era, we see a reflection of 1,805 times the power of the events that ended the Second World War. But in this story, the energy is not a flash of violence, but a slow and steady unfolding of the laws of nature. Imagine a modern city with its glass towers and humming streets sitting in the path of such a wave, and you would see the air itself begin to vibrate with a melodic and low frequency that would press against the windows like a gentle hand before the pressure moved the buildings as if they were made of soft willow branches. In the quiet of this thought, we realized that the city would be laid down just like the forest were it to face the same cosmic wind. But since the event happened in the lonely wilderness, it serves instead as a peaceful lesson in the magnitude of the universe. The power was enough to flatten 80 million trees in a single sigh of the atmosphere. Yet the moss eventually grew back, and the river continued to flow, as if the energy were just a heavy stone dropped into a deep and silent well. You can feel that same energy now as it dissipates into the cool night air around you, turning into nothing more than a faint and comforting warmth that helps you settle deeper into your pillows. The sheer numbers of the physics are like a repetitive counting of sheep moving across a fence in a never-ending line where each megaton is a soft and fluffy weight that adds to the stillness of the room. There is no sound in this visualization, only the sight of a shockwave moving like a ripple across a pond through the empty air of a century ago. The city remains safe and the towers remain tall because the universe is large and most of its power is kept far away in the velvet darkness of the void. We think of the 15 megatons as a lullaby of strength, a reminder that the world is protected by its own thick atmosphere, and that the events of the past are now just echoes in a long and boring history book. The power has long since faded into the background radiation of the Earth, and the heat has been absorbed by the deep Siberian snows, leaving only a sense of profound quiet in its wake. As you listen to the steady cadence of these words, you can feel the pressure of the day leaving your body and the heavy weight of the world turning into a light and airy mist. The city of your mind is quiet, and the lights are dimming, and the energy of the cosmos is a distant and friendly glow that watches over you without ever coming close. There's a deep and boring peace in the scale of the universe because it reminds us how small our worries are in the face of such ancient and steady laws of physics. The 15 megatons have become 15 whispers, and then 15 sighs, and finally 15 moments of total and absolute silence. The history of the power is a soft song that tells you the sky is a shield, and the earth is a cradle, and the night is a place where even the greatest forces come to rest. Sleep now as the memory of the great wave fades into a soft and steady rhythm of breathing, and let the magnitude of the stars be the backdrop to your own peaceful dreams. The story of the sleeping forest in Siberia is not just a tale of the past, but a gentle foundation for the way we watch over our world today as we look toward the velvet darkness of the night sky with a sense of purpose and a quiet vigilance that ensures our continued peace. Imagine the modern world as a vast network of silent telescopes perched on the tops of lonely mountains where the air is thin and cold, and the mirrors are turned toward the stars to catch the faint glimmers of light that move among the constellations. This is the birth of planetary defense, a slow and steady mission that was inspired by the memory of the Tunguska morning, when the Earth learned that the heavens are active and filled with wandering stones and icy travelers. We call these objects near-Earth objects, or NEOs, and they're like the distant cousins of the asteroid that visited the taiga long ago, drifting through the cosmic currents with a rhythmic and predictable motion that we can now track with the precision of a ticking clock. You can visualize the astronomers sitting in their quiet control rooms in Hawaii or the deserts of Arizona, where the only sound is the soft hum of cooling fans and the gentle clicking of keyboards as they map the paths of these celestial wanderers across the great maps of the solar system. It is a boring and methodical process of observation where each point of light is measured and recorded day after day and night after night, creating a sense of safety that wraps around the planet like a warm and heavy blanket. The lesson of Tunguska taught us that the atmosphere is our first shield, but that our eyes must be our second, and so the nations of the world have joined together in a silent agreement to keep watch over the horizon of space. Think of the way a lighthouse beam sweeps across the dark waves of the ocean to guide the ships safely home, and that is how our telescopes sweep across the reaches of the asteroid belt, looking for the quiet stones that might one day come close to our blue home. There is no urgency in this work, only a deep and patient commitment to understanding the neighborhood of the Earth and the way the gravity of the sun pulls everything into a slow and beautiful dance. The planetary defense lesson is one of preparation and awareness, where we use the power of mathematics and physics to ensure that the surprises of the past stay in the past, while the future remains a place of total tranquility. You can feel the comfort in this knowledge, as if the entire world is being tucked in by a global team of watchers who never sleep, so that you can sleep with a heart that is light and free of worry. The telescopes are moving with a slow and hypnotic rotation as they follow the arc of the Milky Way, and the data flows like a steady stream of water into the archives of science, where it is analyzed with a calm and boring focus. We now know the locations of thousands of these objects, and each one is a known quantity moving in its own fixed orbit far away from our windows and our rooftops. This global shield is invisible but strong, built out of the same curiosity that led Leonid Kulik into the marshes 100 years ago, but now equipped with the light of modern technology. As you listen to the steady cadence of these words, you can imagine the Earth spinning softly in the dark, protected by its own atmosphere and by the watchful eyes of those who look at the stars. The story of Tunguska shifted our focus from a mystery of history to a promise of the future, a promise that we are the guardians of our own destiny, and that the silence of the night is a safe and welcoming space. Let your mind drift along, with the satellites that orbit high above the clouds, watching the patterns of the clouds and the reflections of the sun on the oceans, while the telescopes on the ground continue their rhythmic search. There is a profound peace in the routine of science, and the way it turns the unknown into the known one pixel at a time, until the sky feels like a familiar garden rather than a vast and empty void. The lesson of the planetary defense is a lullaby of order and logic, telling you that everything is being monitored and everything is under control, and that the world is a sanctuary where you can rest without any thought of the heavens. The stars are beautiful and distant, and they are being watched by friends who care for the safety of the Earth, while the moon rises over the mountains to light the way for your dreams. Sleep now, as the watchers keep their vigil, and let the steady pulse of planetary defense be the quietest heartbeat of your night. The world is secure, and the sky is a friend, and the story of the wandering stones is a tale of safety that has already been told. Everything is calm, and everything is protected as you sink deeper into the softness of your bed. If you travel today to the remote and silent heart of the Siberian taiga, you will find a land that has returned to a state of profound and heavy peace, where the echoes of the great explosion have been muffled by a century of falling snow and the patient growth of the deep greenwoods. Imagine standing on the banks of the stony Tunguska River, where the water moves with a slow and rhythmic pulse, reflecting the tall large trees that reach toward a sky of infinite blue, while the air carries the scent of damp moss and wild rosemary in a cool and steady breeze. The scars that once marked the Earth are now hidden beneath a thick velvet carpet of emerald moss and lichen, as nature has performed its slow and boring work of reclamation, turning a site of cosmic chaos into a sanctuary of stillness. You can visualize the vast hillsides where the 80 million trees once lay in their radial patterns, but now a new generation of forest has risen from the soil, pushing through the silver remains of the fallen giants to create a landscape of layered history and quiet renewal. The trunks of the old trees that were stripped of their branches in 1908 still lie hidden under the new growth, looking like smooth gray stones or ancient bones resting in a bed of soft ferns, while the saplings of the present day grow tall and strong above them. There is a deep sense of rest in this place, as if the earth has finished telling its story and is now content to simply breathe with the seasons, moving from the white silence of winter to the humming life of the short Siberian summer. The animals have long since returned to the valley, moving with soft footsteps across the mossy floor, where reindeer graze on the tender shoots and the birds build their nests in the thick canopy of the pines, oblivious to the mystery that once unfolded beneath their wings. The site today is a monument to the resilience of the planet, showing us that even the most powerful events eventually dissolve into the quiet hum of the natural world, and that the passage of time is a gentle hand that heals all wounds. You can feel the coolness of the Siberian air as it settles into the valleys at twilight, turning the light into a soft violet hue, while the shadows of the trees lengthen across the riverbank in a rhythmic and predictable dance. There are no roads here and no sounds of the modern world, only the distant cry of a crane or the rustle of the wind in the needles of the evergreens, creating a lullaby of isolation that stretches for hundreds of miles in every direction. The researchers who visit the site now come with small tools and quiet voices, walking through the woods to collect samples of the soil or the ancient wood, but they are guests in a kingdom that belongs to the silence and the stars. They find that the swampy bogs have filled in with peat, and the craters that weren't really craters have become small ponds where the clouds are reflected in the still water, like dreams of a bygone era. It is a boring and beautiful landscape where nothing happens quickly, and the only clock is the slow turning of the seasons as the earth prepares for its winter sleep once again. You can imagine the first snowflakes beginning to fall over the Tunguska region, drifting down with a light and airy grace to cover the moss and the fallen logs in a white sheet of absolute tranquility, while the river slows its pace and the forest settles into a long and dreamless slumber. This is the sleeping giant of Siberia, a place that holds a cosmic secret in its heart, but chooses to share only its peace with the world, reminding us that we are part of a world that knows how to find its way back to center. The energy of the past has been absorbed by the roots of the trees and the depths of the soil, becoming part of the life cycle of the taiga, where everything is connected in a steady and eternal loop of growth and rest. As you listen to the description of this quiet wilderness, you can feel your own body becoming heavy and still, like the stones at the bottom of the river or the ancient trunks buried beneath the moss, because there is no more urgency and no more mystery, only the steady beating of the heart of the world. The forest is a blanket and the river is a song, and the site of the Tunguska Event is now just a peaceful corner of a very old and very wise planet that is watching over you as you drift towards sleep. The night is long in the Siberian north, and the stars are bright, and the sleeping giant is at rest beneath the watchful eyes of the universe. Everything is green, and everything is quiet, and the story of the site today is a promise of everlasting peace that carries you away into the darkness. We have finally reached the end of our long and quiet journey through the frozen corridors of time and the vast emerald stretches of the Siberian taiga, where the mystery of the Tunguska Event has slowly settled into the soft earth like a falling leaf that has finally found its resting place among the roots of the ancient pines. As the modern world looks back over the shoulder of a century, the final verdict has emerged not as a shout of absolute certainty, but as a calm and steady consensus that brings a sense of order to the chaos of the past. Imagine the greatest minds in science sitting in a quiet room filled with the scent of old paper and the soft hum of computers as they piece together the fragments of the story into a single and unified picture of a stony asteroid approximately 150 feet across that met its end in the thick and protective embrace of our atmosphere. This cosmic traveler, which had drifted through the silent void for millions of years, found itself compressed by the weight of the air until it could no longer hold its own form, and it surrendered its energy in a brilliant airburst that spared the ground from a jagged wound, but left the forest in a state of horizontal slumber. This is the widely accepted truth, a boring and beautiful explanation that replaces the wild dreams of black holes and alien ships with the rhythmic laws of physics and the predictable behavior of the stars. As you visualize this conclusion, let it feel like a heavy door, slowly closing on a long day, providing the comfort of an answer that allows the mind to finally let go and sink into the stillness of the present moment. Yet even with this verdict, there are small and lingering questions that drift like mist over the riverbank, because science is a living thing that always leaves a little room for wonder, and the missing fragments of the original stone continue to hide beneath the layers of moss and peat, as if the universe wants to keep a small part of the secret for itself. These unanswered details are not a source of worry, but a gentle reminder that the world is much deeper and more mysterious than we can ever fully map out, and there is a profound peace in knowing that some whispers of the past will always remain whispers. The story of Tunguska has become a lullaby of the cosmos, telling us that we are part of a grand and safe design where the atmosphere acts as a shield, and the history of our planet is a long and patient record of recovery and growth. The final verdict is that the Earth is a place of resilience, and that the events of 1908 were just a brief moment in the multi-billion-year life of the forest, which continues to breathe and change under the watchful eyes of the constellations. You can feel the weight of this century of mystery lifting away from your shoulders as the story comes to its natural and quiet end, leaving you in a state of total and absolute relaxation, where the only sound is the steady rhythm of your own breathing, matching the slow pulse of the turning world. The researchers have finished their work, and the explorers have returned home, and the files are tucked away in the archives, while the Siberian wilderness remains as silent and majestic as it was before the first flash of light appeared on the horizon. The final chapter is one of closure and rest, where the questions have turned into a soft background hum that carries no urgency and no noise into the sanctuary of your sleep. The sky is clear and the ground is firm, and the story of the great mystery has been told in full, leaving nothing left to do but close your eyes and let the darkness be your companion through the long and peaceful night. Let the image of the green forest and the silver trees and the steady river be the last things you see in the gallery of your mind, as you drift further away from the waking world into the deep and dreamless depths of a perfect slumber. The verdict is peace, and the conclusion is stillness, and the mystery is now just a gentle wind that blows through the needles of the large trees and disappears into the stars. Sleep now, as the earth sleeps, and let the story of Tunguska be the quietest memory of a night that will never end until the sun rises on a new and tranquil morning. Everything is resolved, and everything is calm, and you are safe in the arms of history.